If you look at Seattle, they have the most radical member of the city council talks about getting Bezos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bezos is the richest guy in the world, so he's an obvious target if you're a socialist. But if you want to drive Amazon out of King County and Seattle, you ought to look at this is what AOC did when she blocked them from going into her congressional district and cost that part of New York City 25,000 jobs. And I don't think it will not surprise me one morning to have Bezos announced that Amazon was moving everything out of Seattle. And the cost of the
Mm-hmm.
tax, both directly from Amazon and indirectly from all the workers who would then leave, would be just staggering. I mean, it would turn Seattle into Detroit.
So, with all this in mind, what do you think the Republicans, if anything, could be doing better as we're watching monuments being taken down and we're watching the mob just run across cities? I see the Republicans are sort of talking a tough game and Trump's talking a tough game, but are they not doing something that they actually should be doing? Because this stuff isn't stopping.
Well, I think there are a couple of things they should be doing. First of all, in the long run, the Republican National Committee, to go into every major city and create a jobs, prosperity, and safety chapter and start to organize everybody in the city to win municipal elections and state legislative elections who are sick and tired of having people killed. And they ought to plant a flag in every one of these cities and say, we're going to reach out to everybody who's sick and tired of having no jobs, no schools that work, and having your relatives shot. And if that fits you, let's sit down and talk about, how you can be a candidate. We're not going to ask you to vote for some traditional Republican, but we're going to try to help you take back your city. Second, I think that the president has to look at the example that Bobby Kennedy set in the early 60s, when young volunteers were being killed in Mississippi during the civil rights movement. And it was clear that the local sheriff, who may have been doing the killing, and the state police were not going to defend these people. And what they did is they said, look, these are American citizens. And if you're not going to defend them, we are. And they sent in the FBI. And I think in a number of these places, the young woman in Indianapolis, the mother of a 3-year-old, who was apparently shot over the weekend for saying all lives matter. There's a perfect example where she lost all of her civil rights because she's dead. I think they ought to say, we are now going to create strike forces that are going to be prepared to go into the south side of Chicago, prepared to go into New York, any place which is clearly spinning out of control. If you won't protect your own citizens, we will, because they're American citizens. And I think we have to be prepared to be much more aggressive and much tougher about taking this on. And then lastly, we ought to create much bigger and more attractive opportunity zones with benefits so great and with education opportunities so great that we can actually begin to create jobs in the inner city everywhere in the country.
Are you worried, with all that in mind, that this mix between COVID and riots and protests is going to do sort of irreparable damage to small business across the board, no matter what, at this point? Because if you weren't taken out by COVID, and now again with the lockdowns, if you somehow survived, I have a friend who called me yesterday she's a masseuse. She usually goes to people's homes. She can't go to people's homes anymore. She got a little shop over the last couple of weeks, just a little one-room place. Now they closed her down, and she's thinking of leaving California now, and she's not even sure what she's going to do for a living anymore. That the average person, the corporations can basically deal with these big blows, but the average person just can't, figure out a way to live if every month something crazy is going to happen.
Look, even big corporations, Brooks Brothers, for example, which is a almost 200-year-old company, may actually be 200 years old, has filed for bankruptcy.
Right.
United Airlines. Even really big places can get in trouble. But the point you make is important at a couple of levels. I work very closely with Alfredo Ortiz and the Job Creators Network, and they do terrific work helping small businesses. And we have been much more proactive than the Europeans at trying to help small businesses. But I think one of the things you're going to see is people are going to leave California. People are going to leave big cities. I mean, I would not be at all surprised to see New York lose virtually everybody who has any resources, just because the taxes are too high. The streets are beginning to be unsafe again. People don't want to be in a place that's out of control. If you look at Seattle, they have the most radical member of the city council talks about getting Bezos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bezos is the richest guy in the world, so he's an obvious target if you're a socialist. But if you want to drive Amazon out of King County and Seattle, you ought to look at this is what AOC did when she blocked them from going into her congressional district and cost that part of New York City 25,000 jobs. And I don't think it will not surprise me one morning to have Bezos announced that Amazon was moving everything out of Seattle. And the cost of the tax, both directly from Amazon and indirectly from all the workers who would then leave, would be just staggering. I mean, it would turn Seattle into Detroit.
All right, so let's back up a little bit, because I know we can sort of focus on this for the entire hour, but I think your career we could do several hours on this easily, but I think your career and some of the things that you have done might help sort of light a way that we can get out of some of this stuff. So when you were Speaker of the House, can you just talk a little bit about how Democrats and Republicans could or could not work together, and what you think has happened that has led us to there's virtually none of it now. How you were able to make some of those fights and build some of those bridges, or have some of those bridges burned?
Well, I would point out that, in fact, when the crisis really hit this spring, the House and Senate did manage, and I give Steve Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury, some real credit, but the House and Senate actually worked together and produced trillions of dollars in spending. I mean, they did it pretty fast. They did it pretty cleanly. There also has been a steady stream of small bills that people can get together and agree on. Lamar Alexander, the senator from Tennessee, is probably the best example of that. He's a genius at figuring out what they can do rather than what they can't do. But the key to what we did was very explicit, and people who want to know about it can read a very simple small book by Tom Evans called The Education of Ronald Reagan. Reagan had, after his movie career and his TV career, he ended up spending 8 years working for General Electric. And it was a really interesting story, because he went around the country as a spokesperson. He gave about 375 speeches to factories. So he had a lot of practice talking to blue collar workers, taking questions, being a celebrity, which was great preparation for running for governor. And in the process, Reagan was in a period where he wouldn't fly an airplane. He did a really bouncy flight in, I think, late 45. So he did not fly an airplane again until 1965. And so he went everywhere by train. And the guy he worked for was a very conservative intellectual, the head of human relations and union relations at General Electric. And so this guy would give Reagan conservative economic books. So here you have Reagan riding across the country in a train, reading conservative economics, preparing his speeches. Well, Reagan came up with a model, which he really got from this particular guy, which Reagan summarized in everyday language by saying, my job is to shine the light on the American people so they will turn up the heat on Congress. But what that meant was you had to have a program like 3-year tax cuts that was popular enough that the American people would say to their congressman, I really want you to pass this.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.